Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. And right now we're going to play a video with Dr. Sailesh Rao from Climate Healer, sorry. And you're going to be able to hear about the HEAL acronym, how the Planet Zero project, Prevent Year Zero campaign is rolling. So I'm going to go right into that interview. Guys, check it out and leave your comments as you're watching it. And welcome back to another episode of the Soul Flow Vegans podcast. I am your host and founder of Soul Flow Vegans, Sean Russell. And on today's episode, we have none other than Dr. Sailesh Rao on our episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, your name has come up so many times in our podcast from people that we worked with across the country, the work that you're doing, on behalf of the planet and every living being is much appreciated. It's a voice that we can't even get enough of. We need more voices out there advocating for the animals. And to have you on this program to talk about one of the pillars, one of the three main pillars of the vegan movement, the environment. Because without the environment, we know we have nothing. This is an opportunity for our audience to learn directly from a leading voice in this movement. So, jumping right into it, can you give us a little bit of your background and in the work that you do?
Okay. I'm a systems specialist. I'm an engineer. I was trained in electrical engineering at Stanford. And then once I graduated, I started working on the internet, um, the backbone hardware for the internet.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that happens when you're trained as an engineer is that you have to cut through and figure out the truth in science, because otherwise whatever you build will not work. So we know that science is sometimes twisted to suit the funders' interests. So you have to figure out what is the true science behind something. So I started working on the environment in 2006. Once I saw a presentation by Al Gore, and I was shocked. I said, if half of what he's saying is true, I'm wasting my time trying to make things run faster on the internet. So I told my wife that, and I said, I want to work on this full time. And she said, okay, if that's what you want to do, go for it. So that's how it started. And then a year later, I started Climate Healers, where we are looking at how to solve climate change. How do you reverse climate change? Because it's not okay, when the earth has a fever, to say, yeah, let's make sure the fever doesn't go over 1.5 degrees Celsius. No, you need to bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, what can we do to reverse this? And I started looking at it from a systems perspective. And I began to see that the science that is being done on climate change is slanted by the fundamental assumption that the American way of life is non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you begin with that assumption, the American way of life is non-negotiable, a consumer economy has to be promoted, then you start slanting the science. Suit that. And I began to see signs of that happening. And I couldn't get Al Gore to talk about animal agriculture because even though it is one of the leading causes of climate change, and everyone agrees that it is one of the leading causes of climate change, it is the leading cause of desertification, of deforestation, of all kinds of other environmental issues. But only when it comes to climate change, they don't talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I began to look into it and study it more. And I realized it is the leading cause. It's not just one of the leading, it is the leading cause of climate change. Our entire way of life is causing climate change. So it's literally as if, our house is on fire, and when you stop throwing fuel on the fire,
Mm-hmm.
that's veganism. Okay. And when you ask your fellow residents to stop throwing fuel on the fire, that's vegan advocacy. So it's as simple as that. We have to stop throwing fuel on the fire before you can put out the fire. And then we have to rebuild our home. So there's a lot of work to be done beyond going vegan, but veganism is the first step. So it's literally, you have to create this new system of normalized nonviolence and actually implement Dr. King's dream,
Mm.
right? And we have to implement his dream. This is nature is telling us you can't wait any longer. You have to implement the dream, you know. And not only is providing, assure equality for all people, regardless of color, race, whatever, but also assure that you're going to treat animals with respect, all life with respect. And that's what's being called for. And that's what nature is telling us to do.
So one of the things you said is that animal agriculture is one of the is the leading cause for climate change. So
Right.
right now, the understanding from the research and what's being put out there, even from the vegan, some people within the vegan community, is that it's the use of fossil fuels. That's the leading cause of the carbon
Right.
that's what's being released from that. So can you
Right.
explain? And I the white paper that you put out was the main reason why I got you on this podcast, because after I read it, it was like everything is cleanly laid out. You have the facts, you have the figures. It's not anecdotal. It's you go through it and you come out with, okay, this makes sense, and how you're describing it. So one of the big takeaways from it was how methane's relation to what's being emitted into the atmosphere, how that
Right.
changes over time and eventually becomes what we now are calling, the number one contributor to climate change. So can you go into that part of
Right. Yeah. So um, fossil fuels are the leading source of carbon dioxide that we are emitting into the atmosphere. But animal agriculture is the leading source of not emitting CO2. Meaning, if you didn't have animal agriculture, you can start sucking down the CO2 that's in the atmosphere.
mm,
And you can start sucking down a huge amount because 37% of the land area of the planet is used just to graze our animals, not wild animals, right?
mm,
And that grazing land, every year we are burning down the grazing land to make sure that only grass grows, nothing else grows on it. So, in effect, we are preventing so much CO2 from being sequestered on land by promoting animal agriculture. So, I said we need to count that.
mm,
That is the opportunity cost of animal agriculture. So, what I mean by that is if we continue doing what we are doing, we are emitting a certain amount of CO2 and methane from animal agriculture. But if we all go vegan and we have a vegan world, we'll start sucking down so much CO2. Okay, so that means that a vegan world will have negative CO2 emissions, and the current world has some positive CO2 emissions from food, right?
mm.
So the difference between the two is larger than the contribution of fossil fuels. In fact, it dominates. Okay, because the difference between the two is 87% of the total.
Mm. Wow.
And because there's a large negative component that you need to take into account that no one is doing at the moment. But there was a paper in I think it was Nature magazine or Science magazine that talked about that, and I have a reference in my white paper uh, by Searchinger, and they showed that every person is avoiding about 5 tons of CO2 per year by going vegan.
Mm.
So in effect, the carbon opportunity cost of eating animals is 5 tons of CO2 per
So
person.
so if people go adopt a global, the pushes to a global plant-based lifestyle.
Right.
So if we do that, and let's say we're still, using plastics, not the saying advocating not using plastics. So you're saying if the only thing that a person does is go vegan, go adopt a plant-based lifestyle, that we could see a reversal of what we're currently experiencing or what we are about to face, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. See if everything else stays the same and we all go vegan, you will see a reversal. You will see forests coming back because so much land gets returned back to nature. Right now, you have to understand that the land stores 3 times as much carbon as the atmosphere.
Mhm.
And on land, we have been chopping down forests like crazy, right? Only half the trees remain that used to be there. So if you bring back the forest that we have chopped down, you can suck down the CO2 that's in the atmosphere because every tree stores carbon, and half the weight of a tree is carbon that used to be in the atmosphere.
Mm.
So it doesn't take it from the soil, it takes it straight from the atmosphere. So you can literally reverse climate change by bringing back the forest. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, what happens when everyone goes vegan is that the entire system of normalized violence that we are living in today, okay, has to change, has to transform because we are forcing it to transform by saying we are not going to be violent to animals at all. If you're not going to be violent to animals, how can you be violent to other people?
Mhm. Mm.
You know, so it's like it's a different way of living altogether as a species. We now become a caretaker species as opposed to a predator species, okay, when we do that. So we are forcing a change when we each take that step. This is exactly what Gandhi did in India. In India, he asked the people of India to change their clothes from British clothes to Khadi clothes made by Indians in India,
Mhm.
right? And by just doing that step, uh, the Indians were able to bring down the largest industry in England at that time, the textile industry, and bankrupt it.
Mhm.
The British government was on its knees begging to negotiate with the Indians. Okay?
Mhm.
So it was a simple change that each Indian did that caused a massive change in the economic structure of the whole. And veganism is doing exactly the same thing. By going vegan, people of the world, around the world, are doing this together. We are forcing Burger King to offer impossible burgers. We are forcing all these fast food companies to start offering vegan options. Why? Because in any group, it's the vegan who decides where the group goes to eat. And if you don't have a vegan option, no one's coming. The groups are no longer coming to those shops.
Mhm.
So to those restaurants. And so they are forced to offer it. And so we are forcing a change in the overall system by going vegan. I mean, right now there are only about what 2-3% of the people are vegan.
Mhm.
Even that is causing such a huge ripple effect, right?
Mhm.
So you can imagine if 50% of the people are vegan, we're going to completely transform the system. You can no longer have wars, endless wars, and shooting animals and things like that as normal, right? It'll
Mhm.
become abnormal, and so it will then cause a conversation between us to decide how are we going to organize ourselves as a species where we are not violent to other beings anymore. That's a different way of organizing ourselves.
So the goal is to have everyone switch over to veganism. Like now, to some people, that may seem like a ambitious goal for everyone to go vegan. And then hearing that it has to be everyone, then it's like, okay, this is not going to happen. So why even try? Why even be an advocate, even if I am
Right.
vegan? So is there uh, a percentage, or does it have to be everyone? Like because like especially with like I said, we're getting to it about the 2026.
Right.
What happens if everyone isn't vegan? Is
Right.
there like a percentage that we can look at to say, okay, if we are there, we're at least going to be in the right direction?
Yeah. So what happens is, in any system transformation, any major transformation like this, only if only 3% or 3.5% of the people implement it and they firmly believe in it, okay, they cause the whole system to turn around. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, when 10% of the people believe that this system transformation is going to happen, then it happens. It will happen. So it's one of those psychological things that because when 10% of the people have a very strong belief in something, and they actualize it,
Mhm.
then the rest of the majority will come along eventually. See, in any species, you have these trailblazers, that go out and try new things, and you have the conservatives that stick with what they know,
Mhm.
right? And you need both in any species, because if the trailblazers are doing something silly, they can come back to where the conservatives are. So,
Mhm.
right? But when trailblazers find something that is a better way of living and they stick with it, and they get 10% of the people to believe that, and they go over, then the rest will come along eventually. So it's inevitable that transformation is going to happen. It's a little bit like even the internet, right? When I started working on the internet, people told me, "You're crazy. Who's going to read stuff on the internet? Who's going to
Mhm.
buy things off the internet? This
Mhm.
is nuts, right?" And I thought maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm spending my life trying to work on something that may not be used. But within 7 years,
Mhm.
I overheard someone say, "I cannot live without the internet." Right? It was that fast from saying it's no one's going to do this to everyone saying, "I want to be there. I want that." Right?
Mhm.
And this is exactly what happens with the system transformation. This is how it happens. So I say every one of us is making a difference. So imagine, I think of it as a dam holding back this water, which is basically compassion, right?
Mhm.
Holding back this compassion, and we are all punching holes in that dam, and you see little bits of flow of water of compassion coming out. This is the vegan movement. And as more and more holes are punched, eventually the whole dam will burst and break. And then it'll become normal to be compassionate to all life.
So it's a movement of compassion, and this compassion extends to all living things, which all
Right,
includes the earth.
right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about when I hear talks about climate change and protecting the earth is the earth itself, and the fact that the earth is resilient in the
Mhm.
sense that you compared it to a fever. What
Right.
I see it as, we don't want the fever to get to the point where the earth removes the virus that is causing it to feel sick, which would be the human race. So
Right.
in reality, if people want to look at self-interest, if they're so far removed from the earth, as silly as it may sound, being an advocate for being addressing climate change is actually making sure that you have a place to live, that your
Right.
family has a place to live. And another thing too, even within the vegan community, is that conversation of compassion.
Right.
It's compassion is for yourself as well,
Mhm.
and understanding where you are, having that inner dialogue of how you're being in the world, because that shows, and what you see is a reflection of what you're emitting. So
Right.
so do you see that conversation happening in the vegan space? Because as far as, yes, be an advocate, yes, you could be compassionate to the animals and to the environment, but what about self compassion?
Right. So we did a documentary called "A Prayer for Compassion."
Mhm.
We talked to a lot of religious leaders and leaders of the world, and asked them about compassion for animals and how is that part of our upbringing, our religion. And everyone agreed that compassion for all life is the foundation of all religion, and it always begins with self-compassion.
Mhm.
Because unless you're compassionate to yourself, you can never truly show compassion to others, right?
Mhm.
So it always begins with that. The inner work is the foundation of all compassion. And I see veganism as an ethical stance. That's an ethical stance in which we are deciding how are we to live among others, right?
Mhm.
And also, when we tell the story of Earth as being some passive thing that we are acting on, simultaneously, I think that comes from a position of hubris from our
Mhm.
perspective. The Earth is very resilient. She has been around for what, 4.5 billion years, and life has been on Earth for 3 billion years, and life has survived worse things than us, right?
Mhm.
and and she created us, right? So we cannot tell a story in which the evolution of an opposable thumb and a prefrontal cortex is a fatal flaw
Mhm.
in evolution that will kill itself, right? That's the kind of story we are telling now. Whereas that's not the way, the kind of stories that I was brought up in. The stories that I was told is you're part of something much, much larger. Okay. You are just a tool, an instrument,
Mhm.
and you have to do your job. You do your duty for the good of all and let go of the fruits of your action.
Mhm.
Because that doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the whole. So we have to have faith that we are part of something much, much larger that's much more intelligent than we give it credit for, right? And so that's the story I tried to tell. Um, at first I said, okay, maybe when I started working on the environment, I got very depressed. I thought maybe everything I was taught was wrong, and we are going to hell in a handbasket. That's exactly what we're doing. We're killing ourselves off. And then when my granddaughter was born, she literally changed my life. She changed
Mhm.
my perspective because I went to see her when she was a month old, and I held her in my arms, and she looked up at me and gave this smile,
Mhm.
and I realized she belongs exactly as she is. Yeah. I mean, she is part of life, and
Mhm.
we are all part of this something much, much larger. And so I said we have to find that story because we tell stories, and based on those stories, we determine how we act, right, as a species. This
Yeah.
is how we coordinate our actions among billions of us because we buy into a common story, and then we play a common game. Right now, we're playing the game of money, right?
Yeah.
And so the story that we tell where we don't belong in nature is a story that's self-perpetuating. That sort of, once you tell that story, you really believe it, and then you start acting like it, right? But when you tell a story that you do belong in nature and you belong exactly as you are, and as part of that, we are going to transform ourselves as if we're a caterpillar turning into a butterfly,
Mhm.
right? So we'll transform from a predator species to a caretaker species. And then when you tell that story, people say, hey, yeah, I prefer that story to what is being told today, right? So I try to find that story. And in that story, what we have been doing so far is we have been heating up the earth. We've been heating up the earth over the last 10,000 years, and we've done a great job of it. And we did that by burning down forests and by having this killing machine kill things, right? So
Mhm.
we heated up the earth and we kept the temperature constant for first 10,000 years. And then over the last 200 years, we have increased it by 1 degree Celsius. And in the process, we have now understood what we did. So we have the science now to back up what I'm saying.
Mhm.
And and now we have to start cooling down the earth. Okay, and we have to then maintain the temperature where it at the thermostat setting. So we become like the thermostat species for the planet. Okay,
Mhm.
we have the responsibility because we now know as a species we can change the climate. And once you know you have that power, you have the ability to use that power for the good of all,
Mhm.
right? So we can use that power for the good of all. So that requires us to change how we organize ourselves, right? Because uh, uh, what we did to heat up the earth is we created a system of normalized violence.
Mhm.
What we have to do to cool the earth is to create a system of normalized non-violence. So you literally have to implement Dr. King's dream.
Mhm.
Right? And it's a dream that we've all, the dream of equality for all life is a dream that we've all had. It's part of our constitution.
Mhm.
We even say all men are created equal. And then we said, okay, men also means women. It also means children. And eventually men really means all beings. It's all beings are created equal. And so we now have to actually implement it. And can we not do that? Of course we can, right? So
Mhm.
it's up to us to figure out how to organize ourselves and how to make decisions, how to lead our normal lives, So we need to lead a normal lives, and the planet must thrive. That is sustainability. If you lead your normal life and the planet dies, that's not sustainable,
Mhm.
right? So we know that. So the quest for sustainability is the quest for Dr. King's dream, to implement his dream, to actually do what we say,
Mhm.
you know?
One of the things that I come across um, on a daily basis is in relation to compassion,
Mhm.
is in how I respond.
Right.
Posting these videos, the podcast, the articles, you'll get the occasional, I'm sure you dealt with this plenty of times, get the occasional response,
Right.
what about bacon or they need milk or whatever the quick,
Right.
funny, try to be funny remark is. And I find myself in practicing compassion, not being quick to respond,
Mhm.
you know, responding with a thank you or responding with a like. And
Mhm.
that usually diffuses what's going on. But at the same time, I want to be mindful of not being a passive voice. So I use my communication as my advocacy, my communication of having these interviews, showing what's happening, showing the activists, showing the advancements in the food industry. What are some ways that people can practice compassion at the same time, not practice passive, being passive in their
Right.
advocacy?
Right. I think in a way we have no choice but to be active in this, because just by being vegan, you are exemplifying compassion. Just by eating publicly, or just kind of work that you're doing, communicating with people, you are exemplifying this new way of living. And when you thrive like that, and you show that you're happy, and you show that you are joyful, you are telling others, look, there is a better way to live. So this is literally like the trailblazers of the species going out to another pasture and saying, look,
Mhm,
this is actually, there's more here. It's much better here. So come on over. And then, of course, there are some who stick to what they know, who are going to say, no, 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 I don't want to come. You know,
mhm,
and I say, we are addressing the people on the wall, people who are on the fence,
mhm,
and we are helping the people on the fence to come over. We are not really addressing the people who are far away behind the fence, who may be screaming, saying, no, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there. Because they'll eventually come closer and closer to the fence. Okay. But first, you have to get the people on the fence to move over. And that's the way movements grow. You
and
know? So I say, that's where advocacy should be focused on helping people come over to our side, and then working out the institutions, the infrastructure, the new constitution, the new currency that you need for a completely vegan world, right? So
mhm,
we need to create that, and just like we did for the internet, we need to create all of this and then give it away.
mhm,
That's exactly what we are trying to do in the Vegan World 2026 project. So we are working on these things, and then we're going to publish white papers. We're going to just give it away, and people want to adopt it, they can adopt it. If they don't want to adopt it, fine. And what happened in the internet world is people adopted it. So that's what we were doing as the standards body. We're just giving away our ideas. How do you connect things? How do you make things run faster, and so on?
mhm,
Because what we found when we started working on the internet was there was a chaos. There was lots of people working on different aspects, and they were not talking to each other.
mhm,
And this product would not work with that product. And people were finding all kinds of trouble, and so they the internet was sort of stagnating because of the lack of standards.
mhm,
And so this is exactly what we are trying to do in the Vegan World 2026 project. Also, we're saying we're going to work out um, every aspect of what a vegan world should be, and then we're going to give it away. And people can argue about it, we can talk about it, and then we can say we want to improve that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But first step is to have a version 1.0 given away to
Mm.
people, right? And then we are going to write apps based on that. We're going to, give away those apps, so that we can help people try it out.
Try out veganism.
Not veganism alone. Veganism, we can do that today, right?
Mm.
But beyond veganism, so right now, when people go vegan, we are persuading corporations to offer us vegan food. Okay.
Mm.
So next thing we need to do is to start making them offer us uh, less plastic, you know, less uh, cruel products for everything, not just vegan products, but that uses less slave labor. I mean, you have to go beyond
Mm.
just the animals and then start looking at social justice issues as well, and encapsulate that in this app so that we are measuring the true cost of everything.
Oh, okay. So it's showing a
Right?
more of a holistic view of what this movement could do for every living being, regardless of who you are.
Right, exactly.
Nice.
So that we start then, putting more effort into things that regenerate the planet. Because right now, by with money, we are being driven to do things that are destroying the planet. Okay, that's
Mhm.
the game of money we are playing right now, right? So we need to change that game. And so how do you transform the game? You cannot transform the game by saying, here is a new game that's completely separate from the old game, and invite them to play the game. No, you have to create a game that works with the old game. It's backward compatible with the old game. But as you play this new game in parallel with the old game, eventually you say, I think I prefer to play this game alone eventually, right?
Mhm.
But they do coexist. So they do coexist for a while until the old game of money becomes irrelevant.
Mm. And you mentioned the shift, 3% leading to
Yeah,
the 10%, leading to that seismic shift and
right.
creating that paradigm in everyone, how they, see animals. We're about at the 2% right now
Hmm.
globally. So what does the 2026 project, like what are some of the things that you have implemented now? I know you went over a little bit of it, but what are some of those things that are get people hopeful watching this that we are going towards that 3%?
Well, yeah. So in the 2026 project, we have created study groups and task forces. So a study group is where we really don't know the solution yet, and we are studying, looking at various options that are out there and trying to figure out what our recommendations should be. A task force is a study group that is now implementing a recommendation. It's coming up with a recommendation and is going to implement it. And so we have about 25 different study groups and task forces on the project. And we are from all over the world. And we meet on online, once a week or once every 2 weeks. So each study group determines how often they meet. And then we have a collective group that meets once a month. And basically, these study groups report into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have created a process by which we can come up with recommendations and implement them worldwide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we have these local groups. So we have formed these local groups, climate healers groups, that would then actually go and implement the recommendations eventually. So right now, the local groups are basically disseminating the white paper. They are showing our documentaries. We did a documentary called Cowspiracy, and then we did What the Health, and then we did Prayer for Compassion, and we did one called The Human Experiment. So that shows what is wrong with the current system. So once you eliminate what's wrong with the current system, you have to show a new system. You have to work on a new system that inspires people, and that's what we're doing in the project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have a website called climatehealers.org. And anyone who comes to the website, you'll see a pop-up that will ask you if you want to take a survey. And if you take that survey, then you get on Basecamp and you choose which study group you want to work on, and or you can even propose a new one that you want to work on. So this is how we are organizing it. because we feel that the people who are on the internet should be the first to take the step of, um, because we have a choice. We are the ones who will have a choice about whether to eat, to go vegan or not, right?
Mhm,
A lot of people who don't have a choice, and I don't want to go force them to change something.
mhm. So, what role is my approach is community.
Right.
Building these communities, supporting communities within communities, and bringing people together to create a sustainable lifestyle. Just saying go vegan and then they're struggling trying to figure out where to go, where to even find climate healers. So, what role has the development of communities played in climate healers and the projects you're leading?
It's central to it. Basically, this is all. Every group is a local community, and what we do online is a global community where we coordinate the actions of these local groups and the study groups. So it is all about community. It's about having a conversation between people in the community as to how are we going to um, organize ourselves in a non-violent system.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the core of it. We have identified 7 core shifts, and it's about making sure that everything we do fits within those 7 core shifts. And how do you? So there are people who are active in helping uh, local. I mean, showing movies locally, talking to people locally, helping them with the cooking classes and things like that. So every aspect of it is involves community.
And you briefly mentioned, but there were some big things that you just dropped on us not too long ago, as far as the documentaries you've helped put
Right.
out. So tell us a little bit about that, because I know a lot of people listening to this right now became vegan because they watched Cowspiracy, they watch What the Health, they watch these documentaries that you played a role in. So explain your involvement with these films.
Yeah. So the first documentary that I got involved in was the Human Experiment, and that talks about the chemical pollution of the planet. And so I consider that to be the first in the trilogy that I got involved in, um, because I had written a book in 2011 called Carbon Dharma, and I thought people would read the book and they'll say, "Aha, we'll have to change," and so on. But I got maybe 1,000 people to read the book, right? So it wasn't. Then I realized that we are in a different era. It's no longer driven by books; it's driven by movies and documentaries. So I got involved in that documentary, and in the meantime, I was trying to get Al Gore and to talk about animal agriculture, and I couldn't get him to do it.
Mm,
You know, so then when Kip and Keegan did Cowspiracy, and they were looking for funding, and I saw their clip, and I said, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I've
mm,
been trying to do. I've been trying to get Al Gore to do." So I contacted them and I said, "How can I help you out?" And so I got involved as a co-executive producer. I helped them with defending their numbers, because people who wanted to um, become part of the movie, they wanted them to take out certain things in the documentary,
mm,
like the 51% figure from Goodland and Annam. And I said, no, it's not only is it true, I think it's much more than that. So we stuck to our guns, and I showed them why they should keep it. So this is how I got involved in Cowspiracy. And then when Cowspiracy really became big after it went on Netflix, then I saw, that, I mean, what the hell? There was a no-brainer that we had to do that. And so because you have to look at the health, the environment, the animals, and love. I
mm,
call that the HEAL, heal. You know, health, environments, animals, and love.
mhm.
Love is a movie called A Prayer for Compassion, which is looking at it from every religious angle. Because ultimately, to me, love is the only thing that's sustainable,
Mhm.
right? Hate is not sustainable. Yeah.
So let's go back into the white paper a little bit.
Mm.
So one of the big things are the organizations that are supporting ways that we can combat or address rather climate change. The United Nations is one of the leading authorities right now when it comes to the research that's coming out, the FAO. Can you go into some of the disparities in the reporting and how they're portraying animal agriculture's role in climate change? We touched on it a little bit, but I want to go more in depth.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I had an experience back in the 90s. Um, I bought a brand new car, and that car the next morning burned my house down.
Mm,
Okay? So, and it had a problem. Okay, and the car company knew about the problem, but they were waiting for 10 cars to burn before they solved the problem.
ooh.
So that was their headquarters had this rule, um, that it's not a serious issue until so many cars burn, right? So they told me that mine was the eighth car that caught fire. And because I spoke to the engineer who was looking at the problem
Mhm.
within the company. And he told me, yours is the eighth car that caught fire. Headquarters is waiting for 10 before they issue a recall. So meanwhile, we are just counting you as eight, number eight. And then he explained to me how it happened. And as an engineer, I understand that not everything you build will have some bug or the other.
Mhm.
Okay. There's no such thing as a bug-free design, right? We just need to make sure that any bug that remains in the product doesn't cause things like fires.
Yes.
Because that's a major issue, right? uh, so anyway, I thought it's my bad luck. But what I found after that was it educated me as to how things work in the current system. Because the company sent an expert to examine the fire. And that expert was an academic. He was a professor of physics from a very reputed university. And I noticed that he was not even looking at the car. He was looking at everything else in
Mm.
my house. And I asked him, why are you looking at all these other things? And I spoke to the engineer. He said, oh my God, who told you, who gave you the engineer's number? You know, you're not supposed to talk to him. How can I do my job if you're talking to him? Because his job was to find an alternate explanation for the fire.
Oh.
And so his job was not to indict the company, it was to find something else that could be wrong. So this way, the company can claim no responsibility for what has happened until 10 cars have caught fire in
Mhm.
their assessment. And then they will say, yeah, we have an issue, and therefore, this is what we need to do, right?
Mhm.
Meanwhile, all of these fires that happened is not their fault. That's exactly how the UN is dealing with climate change.
Mhm.
So they're saying, talk about climate change, but don't ever indict the consumer economy, right? Don't ever indict our way of living. Find something else. Find something that looks like it's just how you source the energy. That's the problem.
Mhm.
If we just source the energy with solar energy instead of fossil fuels, we could continue living the way we are living. That is the kind of story they want to tell. But that's not the truth. Okay. So we have to, as if you really want to solve the problem, you have to find the truth and you have to solve it holistically.
Mhm.
Okay? It is our way of life that's being indicted in climate change. It is our inequality that's being indicted, you know, and maybe the powers that be are waiting for, so many people to die off or so many animals to die off before they start telling us the truth. I don't know what is going on.
Mhm.
But what is going on is not right. So I'm saying, okay, we have to start telling the truth about what's going on. Now, I had been doing my own research and I had come to the conclusion that Goodler and Anand's report was correct and that it's even worse than what they were saying because they had written in 2009 that 51% of all the greenhouse gases comes from animal agriculture.
Mhm.
Back in 2009, they had said that.
Mhm.
Right? And these were two scientists from the World Bank. And they were environmental assessment specialists. And the scientists who were on the other side saying it's 18% or 14%, whatever, they were agroeconomists. They were really not climate scientists.
Mhm.
They work for the UNFAO. And if you look at their employment record, you will see that they are really employed by the animal agriculture industry. Okay,
Mhm.
so we are getting numbers from the industry on the other side, and the UN is saying that's correct. I'm saying, that cannot be correct because the industry has an axe to grind. It's going to be biased. So the science that comes out of biased sources should not be accepted. The science has to begin with an unbiased view, right?
Mhm.
Uh, because there's a lot of biased science out there. So you have to sift through it to see what is really true. And only then can you build something that works. Only then can you create something that's lasting, that's sustainable, right?
Mhm.
So as an engineer, I'm trained to look for that. And so I saw that and I said, uh, I'm just going to ignore that and I'm going to concentrate on animal agriculture. So I started working on just telling people about veganism and so on. But the white paper came about because Jane Wells Mitchell came to me and she said, you keep talking about veganism and why we have to go vegan for the environment. Can you just write down why you do that?
Mhm.
Can you just write a white paper as to what is the real cause of climate change? I said, okay. I mean, I'll put down what I know. And that's how the white paper came about. And I was surprised when it got the attention of so many people because I thought it would be common among people who are in the know.
Mhm.
They all know, but I didn't realize not many people know. So
No, the like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I was doing so. This was my process. I I have a show called Soulful Vegans Experience where we put out news clips every day. Then we had the Australian fire, so I wanted to do a piece on that. But then everyone was doing a piece on that, so I wanted to get to the root cause of it. So I started doing research on climate change, doing Google searches. Saw everything that the UN put out. A lot of big websites, what have you. Then I came across your paper and read like the first, maybe one, tenth of it, and I was like, oh, this is different, and it kind of aligns with some of the things I've heard, documentaries, what have you. Read through the entire thing, and it was the first time that I actually saw the facts and figures, that broke down why we're saying this, and
right,
and I think that that's so powerful because not everyone's going to read it, not everyone's going to want to know that the minutia of why, but then the few that have the ability to communicate that message are the ones that are going to be able to read it and distill the information, break it down, use their skills. Like my intention is to, isolate individual subjects within it and put it in such a way that anybody can look at it and say, oh, I want more information. Here's a link to the full white page. And then, but rather than just doing that on an island, I wanted to have you on the podcast and just be able to have a conversation with you about this, because it's not often that you're able. That's one of the wonderful things about podcasts, to be able to have this audience with you, to ask you the questions that maybe weren't that I didn't see in there, finding
right.
about your background. And this leads me to the next point of address some of the criticism that may be out there. And I haven't really seen a lot of the criticism other than, oh, the jokes that people put in the comment sections. But what would you say that to people that the stance that we're both taking right now in terms that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change is biased? It's biased. There's no other way for me to say it. Like, what's your response to that?
Yeah, my response is, first of all, I mean, the criticisms I've heard about the white paper is, first of all, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm an engineer. And I say, yes, that's true. I am an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. But as an engineer, I'm trained to look for truth in science. And that's what I was trying to do. I'm not paid by anybody. I'm just doing it on my own, you know?
Mhm.
In fact, for the last 12 years that I've run Climate Healers, I really haven't really solicited money from anyone, you know? There is a donate button that's hidden in my website. So if they want to do it, they can do it. Otherwise, I'm not looking for money right now. I'm not looking for anyone to influence my work. I want to be independent. Okay?
Mhm.
That's very important to me. Second criticism I get is that it is not peer reviewed. It's not peer reviewed science, whereas the other stuff is peer reviewed. I said, it depends on who your peers are, right? Number
Mhm.
one. And number two, it's a white paper. A white paper is a paper that an organization writes to show why they do what they do.
Mhm.
That's what I did. And in fact, I defined the white paper in the beginning. So this is why I'm writing it. It's not meant to go get approval from anyone.
Mhm.
Okay? This is why we do what we do. And I'm using every source in that white paper. I've given you the reference to it, and I'm using data from that source, and all of those sources are peer reviewed.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's a compilation of peer reviewed data. And I'm just showing you how to interpret that data. So it's up to each one of us to decide whether I'm interpreting it correctly or not. Okay. Um, and the third criticism I get, I mean, these are the two main ones. So the third one, is how can how can all these scientists
Mhm.
look at this and come up with exactly the wrong conclusion? How
Mhm.
can the UN IPCC, which has 2,000 scientists, come up with this wrong conclusion, right? And you are showing, you're taking the same data and you're coming up with this conclusion. How is that possible? Are you telling us that all these scientists are in on some conspiracy? And I'm saying, no, that's not how it happens. Every scientist is doing their job, okay, sincerely. And then the IPCC is a political organization. It's an intergovernmental panel on climate change. Okay, if you look at their process by which they come up with their recommendations, you will see it's a very political process because all the nations have to agree on
Mhm.
what is written in the IPCC report. And so, for instance, I have a couple of webinars that I've done on the white paper where I go into details on each section. And in the second webinar, I showed, the way the IPCC does, for instance, modeling, how to put out the model for, say, CO2 and how CO2 behaves in the atmosphere. They ask people, they ask scientists, show us the results from your model. Okay, so
Mhm.
they got like 15 different model results, and they are all over the place. Model results are all over the place. As an engineer, if I were building something based on these models, I would tell these 15 people, get together in a room and figure out who's correct,
Mhm.
because I'm building something real, with this. So I need to know what is true.
Mhm.
Instead, what the IPCC does is takes an average of all the models.
Mhm.
Now, they're soliciting from 15 different sources. Who knows how many of those sources were all, from the same model, right?
Mhm.
People just copied a model, just tweaked a bit, and then they gave it to you. So there is a lot of bias built into the process. Okay.
Mhm.
And then you look at the model itself and you say it doesn't even correspond to physics, the way physics works. So when you pump up CO2 into the atmosphere, it doesn't come down as the sum of exponentials. It'll come down as the product of three exponentials. We know that too.
Mhm.
So I even show how it will work. We put out CO2 into the atmosphere, and let's say the ocean wants to absorb it fast.
Mhm.
It's going to absorb it the fastest. Then the ocean and the atmosphere will reach a balance first. It's like, you put a big bucket and you're connecting it to a smaller bucket with a big hose.
Mhm.
The two are going to level up first, right?
Yeah.
And then the third bucket will start leveling up because the third bucket has a very tiny hole that connects it to the first two buckets, right?
Mhm.
So that's how physics would work, but that's not how the IPCC models it. And so those are all things I point out as to how a political process can distort the science.
Okay. And so so out of all of the criticisms you've mentioned, none of them were really attacking the data. It's
No,
it's it's more about looking almost like the examiner going into the garage,
exactly.
looking for everything else except the information that you're putting out because it.
Is being worked out. So it's going to start on April 18th and end in July. And My goal there is to go and talk to people about this Vegan World 2026 project, about Basecamp, and get them to join and to form climate healers groups in their area. So I'm basically addressing vegans, you know, uh, showing vegans that they're part of something much, much larger than they thought. that it is a movement that is going to happen. We are going to have a vegan world because I cannot break my pinky promise.
And I want to invite you to consider South Florida for one of your stops.
Mhm.
SoFlo Vegans would love to work with you. We're going to be hosting a film festival. We haven't, this is probably the first time anyone's ever heard that we're making this announcement. So we would love to have you speak, talk about what's going on. We'll do everything we can in our power to bring the community out to hear you live and in person, especially after, you know, being you granting us this. Yeah, so I'm winding down the interview. Hopefully, you enjoyed that. If you want to catch that again, maybe you missed certain things, you can check out definitely our Sofo Vegans podcast, where we have that audio version of that interview. So you can check out its in entirety and listen to it. Um, when you want to. So we're going to jump into our next panel, and it's coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be tips on communicating, and it's going to be with Victoria Moran, Susan Hargraves, and Renee King Sonnen. So check out for that.